If you're ready, let's get into some China news because there's a lot of important stuff going on with this, and that includes Taiwan's vice president will be making a couple stops this week in the U.S. I believe that's actually happening tomorrow, maybe. We have Taiwan's vice president William Lai will transit in the United States. And he's going to make stops in San Francisco and Los Angeles, I believe, on his way to Honduras. Now, the reason that this is significant, of course, Connor, is that China considers Taiwan essentially a breakaway separatist government. And this is the equivalent of the, United States me with the vice president of a separatist government. Obviously, you could get to Taiwan from Honduras to Taiwan without going through the United States, but they're choosing to do so to continue the increase of diplomatic ties between the United States and Taiwan, and further kind of flaunting the strategic ambiguity and one China policy that the U.S. has, at least in name, adopted and proclaimed to, follow over the past, 4 or 5 decades now. So, the fact that we're having further erosion of that is pretty significant. The U.S. is looking for ways to potentially accelerate the delivery of Taiwan's next generation of F-16 fighter jets, and I believe those are the F-15EX variants that Taiwan is buying a bunch of, and so they're looking for ways to get those to Taiwan faster. Overall, I'm not sure how much of a difference it'll make how many, F-16s that Taiwan has. Now, it certainly wouldn't be an easy invasion of Taiwan for China or anything like that. But, if China really wanted to invest resources in taking Taiwan back, probably kind of like Russia-Ukraine situation, there's not a whole lot America could do to prevent it. And so, we're seeing, of course, I think responses from these actions from China, including by China flying 39 warplanes into Taiwan's air defense identification zone. Now, of course, on the show in the past, we have broken down and explained the very important difference between an ADIZ and then actual airspace. And so, the Chinese, they have a map here if anybody wants to look. They're flying through the southwest corner of the ADIZ. I think the most significant thing about this group of flights was that it was the largest number of flights since the fall, and that a bomber was included in these flights, and so that was atypical. But looking at the map, China has actually carried out much more significant incursions of the ADIZ in the past, and so this may not be the most significant thing. So this is of course in relation to Taiwan, Connor, but also probably has something to do with the massive amount of American freedom of navigation operations going on right now in the South China Sea. Of course, we covered recently that the USS Carl Vinson and the USS Essex, which is I believe a destroyer that could handle some aircraft, were carrying out dual operations. And then we had the USS, I think it's the Benfold, carry out some close passes of the Spratly Islands. And now we have two more aircraft carriers, the USS Abraham Lincoln and again the Carl Vinson, carrying out operations in the South China Sea. Now, as I discussed on the last episode of the show, Connor, there was another mishap on the Carl Vinson. This time an F-35 apparently was lost to the sea. So some kind of incident occurred during landing. 7 sailors were injured, including the pilot. 3 were treated on the ship, and so you assume the injuries are not very significant. 4 were airlifted, unclear exactly as to what those injuries are, but to my understanding, we're over a full day later, and there's no reports of critical condition or death, and so likely everybody's going to survive. But this will be the 5th major incident on the Carl Vinson in the past 2 months, and all of those were incidents that cost over $2.5 million to the taxpayer. So I think that's most of the news I had on China. Connor, do you have anything that you want to add in here? I think you're muted.
I have a report here from RT as well that talks about the U.S. Navy sending two super carriers for drills into the Philippine Sea. So this was with Japanese allies, two aircraft carriers, two amphibious ships, and dozens of fighter jets. Again, this is the supercarrier USS Carl Vinson and the Abraham Lincoln, with amphibious assault ships USS America and the USS Essex, guided missile cruisers. 26 aircraft and the destroyers USS Prudence, USS Chaffee, and USS Gridley. And the Japanese had contributed a destroyer to this as well. And there's if people can look up this article, it's called U.S. Navy displays two supercarriers in Philippine Sea drill. The footage that comes out of it is absolutely it's frankly it's revolting. I mean, it's a massive, massive drill, massive show of force, and of course, we're on the eve of the Beijing Olympics, everything going on right now. So this is, a major slap in the face to the Chinese, and especially with everything going on with Russia, just showing how completely detached from reality this administration and the Pentagon really is.
And for Americans who only see that footage on Twitter and only in the context of look how cool and big and badass our military is, boy, our 7th Fleet boys from Indo-PACOM are keeping us safe, and look how cool it looks when all these ships sail in a formation with the bombers and F-35s overhead and everything like that. But you really have to imagine, what if that was Chinese aircraft carriers sailing a couple dozen miles off the Pacific coast or in the Gulf of Mexico or something like that, and how intimidating and scary that would at least be portrayed in the U.S. media as something like that was happening. So
Yeah,
interesting
but
contrast there.
Vice Admiral Carl Thomas, commander of the Seventh Fleet, said this show of strength is freedom at its finest.
Yeah.
And of course, like what you said, I mean, this is why the Russians are talking about not ruling out sending Russian forces to Cuba, Venezuela. There's been discussion how if talks appear to be failing here in the near future, they may reveal strategic agreements they have with, I believe, Nicaragua and Venezuela. And I'm sure it relates to that as well, about sending Russian forces into Latin America and challenging the Monroe Doctrine, essentially, because as I say in my piece, the idea I suppose is that the American sphere of influence extends to the whole world, and Russian and Chinese red lines mean absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
It's why, I mean, even though the Chinese said what they said and threatened consequences about this recent passage of the Spratly Islands and the Paracel Islands, I'm sure we'll have more news like this next week anyway. So
Yeah. So, one thing I want to mention on Russia, and I think you maybe did in your piece there, but just, that the Ukrainian government has been saying, and Zelensky is now saying that, look, there's not a significant buildup or anything like that, and there's, really no increased Russian threat since April, or going all the way back to 2014, and trying to downplay the threat. But, I feel like this is another indication of that, Connor, that if the Americans really thought that Russia was about to invade Ukraine, would we have two aircraft carriers in the South China Sea? Does that seem like, a wise place to position, some of your most critical and advanced military equipment? You're on the other side of China from Russia, or at least, if they were out maybe in the Korean Sea or something, they're a little bit closer to Russia. But what exactly is the point of deploying these advanced carriers to this region if, again, you're worried about getting in a conflict with Russia? Unless I guess maybe that the eggheads that are a part of the foreign policy blob now have completely lost the lessons from the hawks of the Cold War, who at least understood that you needed to balance Russia and China against each other, and think that, well, if you're picking a fight with Russia, then China might try to take the Taiwan or Hong Kong or do something like that. So we need even more military presence to confront China, because Russia may invade Ukraine. So maybe that's the way they're looking at it. But my take is more that they really aren't that concerned about an invasion of Ukraine if they're putting this many military assets so far away from that issue.
Yeah, and of course, yeah, like you said, the Ukrainian foreign ministry is again throwing cold water on all this. The Americans pulling their non-essential diplomats and their families out and issuing all these new don't travel advisories. And they came out and said something like they're safer here than they are in Los Angeles or any crime-ridden U.S. city. I think Joseph Borrell, the EU foreign policy chief, came out and had I believe it was his quote that said, "Don't dramatize this. We're not taking anybody out. It's not necessary right now." And Zelensky is saying more things like this as well. So. But Saki, I just read a report over the wire from Dave DeCamp about this on Anti-War that Saki is coming out and basically going, no, 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 it is him. And like, it's I mean, they're trying to hang on to this. I mean, hopefully it's so that if there's a good resolution here between, Putin and Biden, that they can pull this off and try and use it as like a political win, because they're going to have something if they make the necessary concessions to the Russians in order to resolve this crisis. But at the same time, yeah, I mean, it looks to me, as you said, it's like the policy doesn't make sense unless you believe it is just about hyping up tensions and spending more and more money on the military, which seems to be all Congress is interested in doing.
All right.